I'd like to welcome you back to our study in the book of Obadiah, the prophecies of the prophet Obadiah. We're going to be continuing today, reading a little bit in the prophecies. As we talked about in the first study, these prophecies have everything to do with Esau, and in a way, Jacob. We get to know a little bit more about him because Esau and Jacob are brothers. They're twins from the same family. And while they're twins, we can say that, but that's about where their distinctions end. They're actually very different. And as we learned in the first study, they actually, in their mother's womb, are enemies. They're fighting, and that's the way it's going to be basically for all of time. And so we're going to go ahead and get into this study. We're going to go over a few of the things that we touched on in the first study, just so you remember who Esau is, who the Edomites are. We can see on the map the yellow on the bottom where it says Mount Seir. This is the territory of the Edomites. God says he gave them this area around Mount Seir. Right to the north of the kingdom of the Edomites is the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. The purple, the kingdom of the Moabites, and then the orange, kingdom of the Ammonites. So we have several different groups around here. More than anything today, we're going to be talking about the Edomites, the house of Israel as a whole still, because they're not divided at this point. And a little bit today, we're going to talk about the Moabites. They come into play in this part of our story a little bit. And so let's go ahead and reread verse 1 of Obadiah. The visions of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us arise up against her in battle. So God is sending out a command. This prophecy is against the Edomites. God is coming to deal justice to them. Why? Well, part of the reason is the relationship that the Edomites and the people of God have had over the course of time. But part of it has more to do with the fact that several events happened historically when the Edomites could have shown a little bit of meekness or mercy to the house of God, and they didn't. They were not very nice about some of the things they did. And so God's going to come in and mete out what he considers justice. Genesis 36, 6 and 8. It says, And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his house and his cattle and his beasts and all of his substance which he had got in the land of Canaan, and went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And so the scripture itself connects those two words, Esau and Edom, and Mount Seir. This is the beginning of where they're starting, and from there they're branching out into a kingdom. And so we have the separation. North of this, of course, on the map that we're looking at, we have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Jacob, the Philistines, etc. All of this, at this moment in history that we're reading, Genesis 36, is actually the land of Canaan. None of this is actually the land of inheritance given to the people of Abraham yet. God's promised it, but they don't actually have it. Jacob and Esau are actually dwelling in this area as foreigners in a foreign land. So Esau moves south, begins building up a people. It's just south of what will be the promised land. And so we know historically, because ruins have been found now, that Bozrah in the Edomite territory, if we look at the map there, we'll see the red area. Bozrah was considered the capital of Edom. And there on the right, we can see a picture. These are ruins from the ruins of Bozrah. It exists. It was the finding of some of these ruins in current times that began to dispel the doubts that a lot of archaeologists had about whether or not the Edomites were actually a thing, a real people. Now we know for sure they are. They were. And so we have another level of trust and witness to the truth of what it says in the Bible. And we're going to see a couple other witnesses from different areas also today in our study. So we know that God made a statement, and this statement has everything to do with actions, nothing to do with people, descendants, or anything like that. But it says in Romans 9:13, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And a lot of people have difficulty with this statement because, of course, we emphatically believe you're supposed to hate the sin, love the sinner. In this particular case, God, and of course we're talking about God here, not us, God hated Esau. And he has reason to do this. And because he knows the hearts of people, he can. I don't know that we have that right, but God does. So what do we really know about Esau or Edom? Well, number one, he's the older of the two brothers, Esau and Jacob. He's recognized by at least two names, Esau, which means made or formed, and Edom, which means red. We know that over the course of time, his people were known for hunters. We know that his father loved him more than Jacob. We know that he sold his birthright for some red porridge. His brother also stole the patriarchal blessing. He lived on Mount Seir, and it's believed that the nation of Rome possibly came from the descendants of Esau. And we'll look more into that as we go. We know that his skin was kind of a reddish, goldish color. Probably his skin was reddish, where his hairs were somewhat blondish, and that's probably what gives this distinction in the coloration. But he was distinct from those around him. He stood out, and these are some of the things he was known for. Let's go ahead and read in Genesis 25, verse 23. And the Lord said unto her, two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And so this was actually given before Jacob and Esau were born. Two nations they would be, separate. They were both going to be plenty strong in their own right, but one would be a little bit stronger than the other. But the elder would actually serve the younger. So this was a prophecy their mother had. And so she had some expectations going into the birth of these two boys. Let's continue. I'd like to read a small passage here out of a piece of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Gives us a little bit of understanding in part of the historical reference of the Edomites. So in Numbers chapter 20, verse 17 through 21, in our map that we're looking at here, you can see in the Edomite territory, I put a red line down there. Approximately, that's all that is. It's just a good guess. Approximately right there is the house of Israel. If we remember the story of Israel, Joseph was sold by his brothers into Egypt, but he was blessed by God, and he was elevated to second in command. Then there was a famine, and he brought all of his family from the Canaanite land, the lands of Canaan, into Egypt to live. And he took care of them. And then after a time, they began to fall under slavery. And so then God raised up Moses to take them out. And he took them out into the wilderness. They traveled around in the wilderness for a time. And then came the day where God sent them to the promised land. So this is what the beginning of our story. This is part of what we're going to be looking at this time. Where the red line is, they're on the border of what the Edomite people own, and they want permission to cross. Numbers 20, 17 through 21. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand, nor to the left, until we have passed thy borders. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with a sword. So the Edomites were not at all okay with the idea that the whole of the house of Israel was going to march up the main highway through their land into the Canaanite land, because it was still Canaanite land, even though it was the promised land. Verse 19. And the children of Israel said unto him, we will go by the highway. And if I and my cattle drink of thy water, we'll pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. And he said, Edom, thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border, wherefore Israel turned away from him. So what we have here is the house of Israel, they just wanted to go through the main highway, going through the land of the Edomites, straight on into the land of Canaan. But the Edomites said, not happening. You will not be going through our land on no account. And then they actually came out in force with their military to show them no means no. So what does Israel do? See the red line? I've changed it. Now the red line kind of skirts the southern border of the Edomite property. Let's go to Deuteronomy Chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Then we turned and took our journey into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spake unto me. And we compassed Mount Seir many days. And the Lord spake unto me, saying, Ye have compassed this mountain long enough. Turn you northward, and command thou thy people, saying, Ye are come to pass through the coast of your brethren, the children of Esau, which dwell in Seir. They shall be afraid of you. Take ye good heed unto yourselves, therefore. Meddle not with them. For I will not give you of their land, no, not so much as a foot breadth, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau for a possession. Ye shall buy meat from them for money, that ye may eat. You will also buy water from them for money, that you may drink. So they begin skirting around the southern part of the land of Edom, begin skirting southeast and heading north, heading towards the land of the Moabites. God specifically tells them, just stay on the outskirts. You're not going to get any of this land, period. This is their land. Don't even think about it. Anything you take from this land, food or water, you will pay in full. And so very specific requirements for the house of Israel as they pass by, which I find really interesting, especially because God said he hates Esau. And so part of me wonders if part of his hate for Esau has to do with the way they treated God's people, like in this circumstance. But I suspect there are much deeper reasons. This is just a small piece of it. So let's go on in verse 7 and 8. For the Lord thy God hath blessed thee in all thy works of thy hands. He knoweth thy walking through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord thy God hath been with thee. Thou hast lacked nothing. And when we passed by from our brethren, the children of Esau, which dwelt in Seir, through the way of the plain from Elath and from Ezion Gaber, we turned and passed by the way of the wilderness of Moab. So they pass around the southern border, going up the eastern border, and heading up north towards the kingdom of Moab. This is the house of Israel, the 12 tribes. And as they say here, we're brothers through Jacob and Esau. But there was not a good relationship. They were not brothers in the real sense of being brothers. They were enemies in all sincerity. Well, let's go on and head over to Obadiah, the prophet, and we're going to continue in our reading. Again, we're not going to read it all. We're going to touch on some parts of it, because later on in this study, like I said, there's 5 parts to it. We're going to get into some important parts, especially around Christ's birth. And so we've got to kind of take it slow and build the whole story so that we understand what's going on. So verse 2 through 4. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. This is talking about Edom. And so verse 3. The pride of thy heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rocks, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. So this is, again, all about Edom. This is what God is talking about. He's saying they've got pride in their heart, and this pride is what's going to get them killed. God says they may exalt themselves as the eagle, and they may actually try to put their nest among the stars, but it will not matter. God will bring them down. Don't forget the eagle. Don't forget the stars. We're going to bring this up farther on in the study. These are important symbolic words that tell us about part of the history of what's going to be happening. So we've got some pictures up here on the screen. These are from the ruins of Petra. And Petra is in the land of Edom. It's a very important place. We know, and we're going to talk about this more later on in our study, because the Christians, some of them escaped the destruction of Jerusalem to come here during after the death and resurrection of Christ. And so this is an important part of our story. Down in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, you can see an eagle carved out of rock. This is actually from the ruins of the Edomites there in Petra. And of course, this eagle, oddly enough, looks a whole lot like things maybe we've seen, like maybe the eagle even on the United States seal. Just a curiosity, just an interesting thing. But this eagle will play in, and we will see it as we continue in our story. And so don't forget the eagle. Don't forget the stars. Let's continue in verse 5 and 6 of Obadiah. If thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers come to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? And this is pretty important because especially when Babylon came in with Nebuchadnezzar, there was actually 3 different times that they attacked Jerusalem. The last time they came and took basically the remainder of the people, leaving a very minute remnant there in Israel. Maybe a couple dozen families, don't really know, but it's a very small group of people that are left there. The Edomites actually go up there and rob them blind, leave them basically with nothing. And this is exactly what this verse 5 is about. God is saying, even in thieves, talking about bad people, even in thieves, they go into a house, they steal the valuables and leave, but they're always stuff they're leaving behind. Even grape gatherers, when they go to gather the grapes, there's always some left behind. Esau didn't have that consideration for God's people. When they went up and basically stole all they could and burned, they also, when Nebuchadnezzar was attacking Jerusalem, stood in the roads, in the main thoroughfares, and grabbed the people that were trying to escape, robbed them, and killed them oftentimes. They didn't leave anything, no remnant. And so this is part of the reason that God is very angry with Esau and will eventually destroy him completely. Here we have a testimony. This testimony comes off of one of the ruins in Egypt, and this testimony comes from Ramses III. This is right around 1100 BC, before Christ, and this testimony is there. And I have this here only for the purpose of an additional witness of knowing where Esau lived, the Edomites, and who they were. They were a people, and that witness is even held in other cultures' histories. So let's go ahead and read what Ramses wrote. It said, I destroyed the people of Seir from the tribes of the Shasu, which is the Edomites. They plundered their tents from the people, their possessions, their cattle too, without number. They were pine nuts and brought as captives, as tribute to Egypt. I told the gods like slaves in their house. And so this was what Ramses wrote. They had went and they had done an attack against the Edomites and stole a bunch of goods from them and took them home along with slaves. And that witness is given. Here we have another witness from the exact opposite side of Israel, Assyria. And this testimony comes from Tilgath-Pileser, number 3, when he was receiving tribute from the Moabites. This is right around 740 BC. These say, This is what it says. Yahazi or Jahaz from Judah, Kaush Malaku from Edom, Hanunu or Hano from Gaza, gold, silver, lead, iron, tin, brightly colored clothing, wool, bedding, the purple garments of their lands, all kinds of expensive things, the products of the sea and of the dry land, the staples of their land, the royal treasure, the horses, the mules, broken to the yoke, I received. And so again, we have this witness that there were Edomites, and at this time they were sending tribute to the Assyrians. And of course, again, this is another moment, and we'll see this in the prophecy that we're reading, where the very people that the Edomites thought were their friends turn against them. When Assyria came in, both under Tilgath-Pileser and also again later on, they came all the way down to the Edomite land. And so the Edomites fell under their jurisdiction and eventually had to pay tribute to them. So let's go on. We're going to read a small passage out of Samuel chapter 8. Sorry. 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 12 through 15. And here we see a little bit of a connection between King David and the Edomites. This is what it says. Of Syria and of Moab and of the children of Ammon and of the Philistines and of Amalek and of the spoils of Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zoab. And David gat him a name when he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the valley of Salt, bringing 18,000 men. And he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all of Edom put he garrisons. And all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David reigned over all Israel. And David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. And so here we can actually see there is this connection between Israel and the Edomites. David comes in, sets up garrisons, military garrisons all over the Edomite land, and basically just kind of makes them a sub part of Judah for a period of time. Let's go on and read verse 7 in Obadiah's prophecy. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound, wonder thee. There is none understanding in him. And so again, like I already mentioned, the Assyrians came in. The first time they didn't bother the Edomites, and the Edomites thought that they had a friendship, an agreement. Later on, when the Assyrians came in, they did bother them, and they came and they had to give tribute. And so there you have this loss of friendship that they thought that they could trust. Again, with the Babylonians, the same thing. The Babylonians came through and attacked Jerusalem in 3 different occasions. On one of these occasions, Nebuchadnezzar was heading all the way down with the intent to attack Egypt. When he was almost to Egypt, he received a report that his father had died. So he turned around and headed back. And during this time, he went through the Edomite land, and they lost some prestige with the Babylonians. The bottom center picture that is there, this is a recent dig in an archaeological site that found one of the towers that would have been standing during the siege Nebuchadnezzar did against Israel. This is from 587 BC. And so there's now a lot of evidence that connects everything that we're reading with reality. It's not just story on a page. And this is important because the more confidence we can have in what we're reading, the more confidence we can have that what God says about us today will come to pass. Very important. I'd like to read a spot in Lamentations chapter 4, verses 21 through 22. We got a couple different maps here. The map on the left in the middle with Israel in white has this big red splotch. This red splotch was the Edomite lands. But then you see this darker maroon, darker red splotch up in the left corner of that red splotch. This is what the Edomites were reduced to. They lost all of their lands. If you remember, in the first study, we talked about the tribes that were off to the east of the Edomites. They came in and they took all these lands. The Edomites were left with just that maroon little spot, which the map to the right of that, you can see that maroon spot, and on it is the name Idumea. Idumea. This is what the Edomites begin to be called as we progress in time. So it's important because as we start reading other scripture passages, we won't always see the word Edom, but we will begin to see the Idumeas, which are these same Edomites. And that's important to remember. So Lamentations 4, 21 and 22, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through thee. Thou shalt be drunken and shalt make thyself naked. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins. And so God is never going to forget what they've done. He's going to come. They will be judged. There may be a moment, when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and destroys Israel, there might be a moment of rejoicing. Our enemies are gone. They can't bother us anymore. But that rejoicing is only momentary. That rejoicing will end, and God will come in, and he will judge the Edomites. And this is pretty important as we go on. We'll see how this all plays out, especially in the next studies. As I said, there'd be 5 studies. We've got to kind of take it slow because there's a lot in this story, especially as we go on in the birth of Christ and how the Edomites or the Idumeas play in at that time. And so I hope this helps a little bit, and I hope that this blesses your day. Have a great day, and may God bless you. Take care.